So nice to see so many people on. Um, Hopefully this is worthwhile and a good use of your time. My apologies if not, but we're going to be talking about some OPB writing and some tips and tricks that I see a lot and have been advised on by several folks over the last year or two. So, like I said, hopefully this is worthwhile for you and a good use of your time. Feel free to put questions in the chat. You can always send me a question via email afterwards. Happy to answer it and keep that dialogue going and ultimately help you improve your OPB writing and you and your colleagues, your peers, your teams, OPBs as well. So shout out to Captain Ottman for setting this up. Appreciate you doing that. Looking out for your CGO folks and continuing on with your development as well. Yeah, we'll get this started. Most of you guys do not know who I am, but Major Maj VonDran. I'm a psychologist by trade, currently working in a few different capacities at the med group over at Spangdahlem. So I have had the opportunity to work a lot when it comes to bullet writing previously on our previous OPRs and now on the statement writing on OPBs. I see a lot of them that come through on the mentor side as well as being a core executive. So happy to at least shed some light and hopefully help you out with that perspective. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So for OPB writing, this first slide here, this is one you guys should all be aware of, but it's a good one to kind of remind yourself, and that is those four major performance areas. And ultimately, when you're thinking about OPB writing, a primary thought should be, what did I do that falls within these four buckets, right? And how can I articulate it in a way that makes sense, that really gets at the intention of the OPB and helps demonstrate my performance in such a way, speaks the verbiage that meets these areas from from an organizational or an enterprise perspective. So those airman leadership qualities, if you can ever add that sort of verbiage into it, it helps, or synonyms of that sort. Most folks I see tend to do quite well at this, to be honest with you. Sometimes I'll see some odd ones where, maybe it's improving the unit through inspections and it's kind of more executing the mission. So I like to show this just as a reminder it is helpful to fall back on these ALQs and just make sure that what you're putting down makes sense with the four performance areas. So, and for a lot of you who are used to the bullet writing of things, and the same with the statements, I think to some degree, we kind of overcomplicated the statements sliding from the bullet form, when in reality, really, it's just expanding upon them, right? Making them more readable. But the flow of it actually follows a very similar concept to previous bullet writing, and that is we're identifying basically what we did, how we did, and the impact that it had to some degree, right? There's definitely some flexibility, there's some creativity at times, but ultimately we want to very easily verbalize to folks across career fields what we did and the outcome that it had. That readability is a big reason why we moved over in the OPB chain. Over the past year, if you look at that acronym list that's available on the AFPC website, you can tell that acronym list has not gotten much bigger. And it's for a good reason. Ultimately, it wants to have these statements be readable by anyone across the career field, or honestly on the civilian end as well. And so one good practice that I tell a lot of folks is when you're writing those OPBs, hand it off to someone who's definitely not in your career field. Hand it to a spouse, hand it to a civilian. Can they read it? Can they make sense of what you did to some degree? If they can't, is there a way that you should be improving the readability of what you're writing? So often we're writing to our career field and not to the others. And that's very important, especially when it comes time for promotion boards and whatnot, where oftentimes people on your promotion board are not in your career field for most of our cores, or the majority of them are not. So it's important to focus on that readability. All right, just start off with that disclaimer at the beginning, but what I'm talking about here, while I'm using some Air Force slides, a large part of what I'm talking about is not the direct reflection or views of the Air Force, but Major VonDran specifically, okay? And this slide is a great example of that. So this is an opinion piece, all right? This opinion is not coming out of nowhere. It's not something I just created yesterday. There's a lot of reason behind it. But ultimately, take what you will from it and dismiss what you don't. But first and foremost, another thing I encourage everyone to do is really take ownership of that OPB. I don't like the saying of no one cares more about your career than you do. I feel like that's kind of harsh, but to some degree, that perspective may be helpful when writing OPBs. You need to be putting the work in. You need to be thinking about what you did, drafting it up, getting feedback, revising it as necessary. Ultimately, you do care about the OPB a lot, right? If you're caring about your career, about your promotion, reflect that in the work that you put for your OPB. Absolutely. You'll hear some folks do not have their OPBs. They do not write those OPBs. They have a supervisor write them. I'm not going to get into that, but some of the best OPBs I've seen written were written by the person who did the work, revised by the person who did the work, revised and looked at by mentors who weren't even in their leadership chain. So by the time it even got to their supervisor, by the time it got to their squadron commander, by the time it got to their group or wing, that OPB was just extremely solid. So yeah. And in order to have more eyes on it, it's helpful to have time. So the earlier you start that OPB, the better usually it will be. Very rarely do I see a rushed OPB be a great OPB right away. And so the more time, the more effort that you put into your OPB, the better off it tends to be. So please, like I said, just simple rules, but we all know we're all stay busy. Sometimes these OPB deadlines can sneak up on us, but I would encourage you to really work to make sure that's not the case for both you and those you lead. When we talk about perspectives of how to write OPBs, you're going to hear a little bit of differences across people who probably, even those who write OPBs far better than I do. But what tends to work for me is focusing on the content first. I feel like sometimes we get very fixated on the organization of our writing, and we lose sight of the fact that if it doesn't have good content in it, the organization is really not going to matter. You can't take C+ performance and organize it into an A. Okay. And that may sound as harsh as it is, but that content needs to be good. We can always organize it. I think we got a hot mic over there, or maybe a question. All right, I'll keep talking. So one of the things I tell the officers that I lead is I want you to come up with 8 things that you did over this past year, and I want you to start just write about them. Tell me what it is. What did you do? How did you do it? What role did you play? What outcome did it have? And then we just build off it from there. It's even more helpful if they're doing this on a quarterly basis. If they're putting in quarterly packages and they're already thinking about this stuff, OPB writing just becomes so much easier later on down the road. So absolutely, if you want to break it down on a quarterly basis, you certainly can. And then from there, you're going to miss details. That's okay. But now you've got your story, right? And usually what I tend to see is then people kind of start fishing for the outcome from other folks. And maybe you need to talk to other agencies, other resources, other leaders, but that's okay. You're now giving them a target. You're identifying the areas that you need help in. And later on, after that, you tell that story, then you can work on the organization of that of that statement. So I keep using the word story, and honestly, I feel like story is a better way to even say it than statement sometimes, because that's really what you're doing. You're quickly telling the person a story. What did you do and the impact did it have? Does it make sense? Can I easily identify what scope that you were working at? Can I easily identify the role that you played? Um, did you improve something? What obstacles were there, right? Like, just so often I do see a lot of missed opportunities in statements where, they covered for a position that outrank them, and it kind of reads more or less as they kept the doors open, or they kept the building from burning down. But like, what did you improve? Like, how awesome would that be if you're taking a job that's outside of your scope, and then you're killing it, you're crushing it? If we can voice that, oh my goodness, what a good statement to read, and what a good reflection it would be of your performance. So I already talked about that piece of can anyone read it, but I'll say it again. Doesn't hurt. Have some people look over the OPB and those statements. And then this gets into that feedback piece, because ultimately, you should not be expecting to send up a perfect OPB that no one is touching, right? That's not a reflection of you and your performance. That's just more a reflection of people caring about you, and they're trying to help you out, and you're getting different perspectives, different eyes looking at it. And it's easier to do that when you're not as emotionally tied to your writing. So be careful of that. Several years ago, I had an officer who did a change of command ceremony, and he was adamant that he wanted that change of command ceremony listed as a OPR bullet at the time, and it just wasn't. It just didn't have much to it. He has so much else in his career or in that year even, that demonstrated all the leaderships roles he had, all of the outcomes, all the ways he pushed his team ahead, that far honestly exceeded the role he played with the change of command. Nothing against the change of command, but in that situation, if I look back on it, I think we would both agree that perhaps he was a little emotionally tied to it because of all the time that a change of command takes, and not noticing that it just truly didn't reflect the greatness that we wanted for that OPR when he had much better options out there. So here's a few other unwritten rules of OPB writing that I tend to see from BSc leaders. That's our bioscience core. And here's what they're often saying, and this is sliding over a little bit into the higher level reviewer, but nonetheless important. What you write, what you recommend, what you push for matters, okay? It is extremely important to know that it matters. Are you demonstrating that you're doing your job that is grade or rank appropriate or equivalent or better? Are you doing it very well? Are you doing it phenomenally? Are you crushing it? When you read that OPB, does it state that? Do you get that feeling? That's some of the feedback would be great to hear from those folks that you're handing it off to. Like, if you were to read this, what do you think of this person? Are they killing it? Does it read like they're kind of just doing their job? Like I said, ask for that honest feedback. Kind of look for that honest feedback and that emotionality coming back. Okay. Especially on the push aspect, that higher level reviewer assessment, that's going to be your bread and butter when it comes to OPB, right? That is by far the most important section of your OPB. That is an area for your commander to write about you, all right, and indicate to the board your potential, your skills, and what you're ready for. Okay. And so I always do encourage, and I'll talk about this on another slide, I believe, but I do encourage everyone to go ahead and draft up HLR. I've never had a supervisor or commander be frustrated when they receive one that's already filled. They can always just delete it. They can always put in their own words, and they most likely will revise it to some degree. But by putting something in there, it gives you the practice and the understanding, And it also helps them perhaps get a better take as to what you are pushing for, which could help lead to more accurate pushes. That, especially when we have commanders that are leading people of different corps, sometimes they may not just have the understanding of your career field and your pathway. And so by filling that out and giving them an idea of what's next for you, what makes sense, can be very helpful. So, and then same thing along those lines. What you don't write, what you don't recommend, what you don't push for matters. On the flight commander side, if I'm reading an OPB and I'm not seeing a statement that reflects leading a flight, that is odd, right? I'm wondering why that's missing if that's your duty title. If you're already in a element lead position and you're being pushed for a large element lead, that does say something, right? Like, why are you not being pushed to the next level? So it's very important, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on a slide on higher level reviewer assessments, but words matter, and oftentimes those words can be subtle, especially when it comes to OPBs. So, and that's where reading between the lines does happen, okay? So we've got a lot of great officers out there, a lot of people doing some great things, and it's important that what you're voicing in your OPBs reflects truly your capabilities and what you're ready for, or it's at least rank appropriate based on what your mentors and your AFSC functional managers and stuff are telling you to do. So pushes should match time, rank, career development briefs. There's a lot of nuances to this, but ultimately, this is another reason why it's important to have people look over it. Is it pushing you for truly the next position? Does it make sense for it to be pushed at this time now? Those are certain questions that mentors and commanders can help us answer, but definitely something to keep in mind. So I'm going to slide through just a few examples of some duty descriptions here. For most would agree with me, I think, that this is usually the easier part of writing. You are just writing truly your duty descriptions, your scope of responsibility, but it is important. It's definitely not an area to just breeze over. Talking to some of our promotion board members, this does give them just a good avenue as to what is your area of responsibility, right? What are you being entrusted with, which helps put your statements into context. So don't breeze over those duty descriptions. And here are some questions that help you along the way. Who am I leading? What am I leading? What are your responsibilities? Start with the heavy stuff at the top, work your way down to the smallest. Make sure you're getting at money, resources, people, equipment. On the medical side, if it's duties, you can expand on that. But ultimately, officers are promoted based on leadership. And so who are you leading? What are you leading should be the primary focus of OPB writings and identified in your duty description. If you are unfortunately in a situation where maybe your leadership scope is limited, that's okay. Then just start reflecting what you do lead. What are the smaller groups of folks you lead? Are there committees that you lead? Are there groups at the squadron, at the group, at the wing that you lead? Are there functions? Are there meetings that you lead? Like I said, it's important to really think out, what am I leading, and make sure it's being annotated in that area. All right, sliding over to some OPB statements. What you're going to see here is you're going to just see a reflection of just honestly some random OPB statements. I purposely did not put my favorites here. I put statements that looking at I could improve in some way. And that's how I want you to start looking at OPB statements, is not necessarily how do I get the perfect OPB statement, but what's something I could tweak? What's something that just doesn't reflect as well as it could? What am I missing? What could I add? What space is being kind of wasted? What really doesn't add more to it? Those are definitely questions that I would encourage you to consider when you're drafting your OPB, and then more importantly, when you're revising your OPB. Here's a few more as well. All right, so I'm gonna talk about slide 4. Yeah, I'm gonna briefly talk about strats. All right. In all honesty, when I first made this PowerPoint, I did not talk about strats, but I got a lot of questions about them. And so I felt like that was definitely an area to expand on and talk about. A lot of folks that I've worked with feel like stratifications are kind of a mystery. And so my hope is this slide adds some transparency to the process, some understanding to the process if you yourself are feeling that is a mystery, and help you get a better sense as to what is considered, in most cases, when stratifying officers. One important thing that I always remind our folks is there are so many people doing such a great job in the Air Force. I know you guys are crushing it. You're doing an awesome job. The majority of people I've worked with are working. They're gainfully employed. They're earning their paycheck. But as a result of that, that makes for some really good competition. There's a lot of people who are doing great work. And so strats can be very hard to get, okay? And not getting a good strat is not a reflection that your performance is subpar, okay? And look for that feedback. Ask your supervisor and commander for feedback, but do not look at your strats as a pure reflection of just how you're crushing the job. There are some things that may honestly be out of your control or just more time dependent. Okay. So some factors to keep in mind, strats starting over at the 03 side, there's, that's a change over the last few years. Selects are not eligible for rank strats anymore. You may still be stratted based on a duty title. But there's some variability there depending on what your duty title is and at what level you could receive a strat based on a duty title. But like I said, more nuances, but just good things to be aware of. And if you don't know something, it's okay to ask a question. Just do it in a respectful way, but it's okay to talk about strats. All right, so here's some things that do impact getting strats. So for those who are not tracking, most squadrons work by sending up some sort of worksheet in which officers they're ranked at the lowest level. Usually it's at the flight or the squadron level, and they are stratified based on that supervisor, that commander. And then those strats get moved up to the next level to receive more strats, right? Perhaps, the top 20% go on to receive another strat, or the top 10% or 5%, whatever it is, and so on and so on. So, so if you are, the number one strat at a squadron, it would make sense that perhaps now you're heading up to the group table to look at a strat on the group side of things, or the wing. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. When you talk about those worksheets, the things that the people who are stratifying you, your leadership team, this is generally a few items that you tend to see on those worksheets, or at least do play a role. Your PME, get it done. That always works in your favor, especially when there's tiebreakers. Like I said, none of these things I would say are just a win card, right? But they're all factors. And so scope of responsibilities, though, and leadership roles, that is a big one. When I talked about some of the things that may be outside your control, that may be one. It may be very difficult for you to be stratified, but be stratted above someone who leads a team that's 5 times bigger than yours, or something like that, right? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying but scope of responsibility does matter. If there's 2 officers who are both crushing it, and one's leading 15 people and the other one's leading 80, I mean, most of the time the person leading 80 is going to win out. And it may be due to a variety of reasons, but that's just something to keep in mind. scope of responsibility does matter. Of course, job performance. Do your job well. That should go without saying. Time on station does matter. We're seeing this a little less likely now that we're having static closeouts. But in general, right, the more that people can attest to your work, it's great seeing on paper, but the more that, that your commander sees you as their go-to person, right? And that trust is built, right? And usually that increases, hopefully, as you have more time on station. Generally, what we see is people's strats improve throughout their 3 to 4 years of time on station, right? So perhaps their first year on station, they may not be looking at a strat or maybe a good strat. And then as long as they're following their course and continuing with their developmental milestones and doing a great job, we tend to see their strats improve as they hit 2 and 3. When you meet your boards, does play a role as well. Please keep that in mind. And it should, right? Ultimately, your commander is trying to take care of a lot of folks and make sure that they have the best chance to be recognized for their efforts and promoted as well. And so when you meet your boards, does play a role. Advocacy from supervisors, commanders, yep, that certainly plays a role. I've seen a lot of meetings, a lot of strat meetings where a commander is just ready to indicate, just talk about all the things that their troop is doing, and and just crushing it, and they're just giving all these examples and they're advocating, and I see it pay off quite well. So advocacy from leadership certainly helps in some of these meetings. You can't make something out of nothing, but if they're deserving of it and you've got a commander that's got your back, that's awesome, and that advocacy certainly can help. Doing that extra effort. So this isn't necessarily, you could look at it as like whole airman concept, but oftentimes you see conversations happen with what are they doing with what they've got, right? So this is a little contrary to that scope of responsibility, but oftentimes it is often looked at like, okay, what are they doing with the responsibilities that we've given them? When they do have the opportunity, are they doing a great job? Are they looking for more opportunities to do a great job and build their skills? Those are certainly conversations that are had. Previous strats play a huge role. Ultimately, we want to be very careful and not ever bring someone down on strats unless it makes sense, especially at the same duty location or under the same supervisor, or under the same commander, because that could reflect something that isn't necessarily true and could be looked at negatively for promotion boards. It's a whole different story when you go to another base, right? You're kind of starting over in a sense. But when you're at a base, ideally you should see your strats do nothing but either stay the same or improve. Okay. And as long as you're doing what you're doing and things are making sense, okay. And then, like I mentioned up there at the top, that good competition. There's a lot of people who are doing some great stuff, and so it's just important to be mindful of that. I would encourage you when you're looking at strats to just focus on doing a great job. But do not focus on looking at your fellow officers as competition. That really doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help you guys complete your mission. It doesn't help the team. And ultimately, it may reflect some characteristics of you that you do not want reflected, which could hurt you. So, be a team player, work together, and your efforts will speak for themselves. Moving on to the higher level reviewer assessment. Like I said, this is what what most of us would say is the very important, if not the most important part of your OPB. And here's where it should be saying, to some extent, how amazing of a leader you are. Perhaps some example of that, an award you won, or maybe just a more in-depth view of why you're a good leader, maybe some characteristics of your leadership. I do like the ones that tend to reflect that commander has a genuine sense of who this person is as a human being. But maybe that's the mental health provider in me, to be honest with you. So, but yeah, that's ultimately, this is your chance for your commander to indicate why you're ready, in not so many words, and then what you're ready for, what those pushes are for. So generally, for most career fields, those pushes should be a push towards your next job, which should be up in the moving up, and a push for PME. There's absolutely differences, though. There's certain people who are going for certain fellowships, different career opportunities. That's fine. Just make sure what you're writing is making sense, and still is being reviewed by mentors and supervisors within your career field who have a general understanding of your career pathway to make sure it makes sense. There's a lot of folks that, at least in the medical side of things, they are applying for fellowships, they are applying for other various staff jobs, but we would still push them for squadron command because that is the next step up. So it doesn't mean that they aren't going to get accepted for other training opportunities, but when we look at it from what makes sense on paper, that easily articulates it far better than fellowship. I think we had a hot mic on that phone there. There we go. Appreciate you. All right. And this gets at that higher level of your assessment. So I talked a little bit about this, but I think it's always great to provide that draft, but be prepared for the change. Just because you wrote it doesn't mean it's staying there, and most likely won't. But it does help your leader craft their message. So what kind of leader are you? What sets you apart? Words have a lot of meaning in higher level reviewer. The difference between ready and now is astounding. Okay? Primed for something potential. You got to be careful with these sort of things. Be careful with those words that illustrate that this person may not be ready for that job tomorrow or today, or perhaps if in any way reflects that they weren't ready yesterday. So there is a lot of reading between the lines when it comes to pushes, and so verbiage matters. Make sure that your verbiage articulates what we want it to articulate. Conversely, though, remember, this is our higher level review assessment, so your supervisor, your commander, is ultimately the final say. So if they don't feel like you're ready, they could be changing some of this verbiage to articulate that. And that's important to know, okay? You should be having that conversations. That's why we have feedback. But yes, I have written in people's OPB, ready for this. And I have written, the Air Force needs this squadron commander, right? Those are two completely different ways of saying something. And it did, but it was consistent with their skills, their potential, and ultimately how strongly I'm pushing them for that next opportunity based on what they've done. So, but you should know this, and this should be consistent with feedback you're receiving. So it should be a transparent process. I talk about words having meaning. What you don't put here also has meaning. So I see this a little in some of the channels where different OPBs, and maybe it never talks about them as a leader, that's different, right? Great clinician. Okay, I'm glad they're a great clinician, but remember, most career fields we're promoting based on leader. So what are you saying here, right? What we don't say does say something. If we're not pushing them for the next job, if we're not pushing them for the next education, why aren't we? And that is something that is considered. So, like I said, you don't need to know all the unwritten rules. And in fact, I feel like sometimes some of our, there's probably even ones I don't even know. There's ones that were discussed this year even. But it's important to have these conversations. And all the more important that you're talking to mentors, you're talking to your commander, you're talking to your peers, so you just have an understanding as to what your verbiage means. Okay. So I'm going to slide over to our chat here and go down a few of these. I thought strats begin at 02. Did this recently change? Let me check back on that. When I said that at 03, I had the thought at 02 as well. Let me check back on that as well. Sorry if that was a misprint. Will it be possible to share the slides in the email? Absolutely. Captain Otman, if you could do that as well for this one, I'd really appreciate it. Okay, I think that I got all the ones in the chat. All right. I will open it up for further questions or comments. All right. Well, I appreciate those who are listening. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. Hopefully, this was helpful for you. We'll make those slides available to you. Once again, Major Maj VonDran. You'll see my name on the list. Feel free to email me if you have further questions. You can also put it in the Teams chat, and I can answer that as best as I can as well. But hopefully, this was a good use of your time. Best of luck to all of you as you are writing your OPBs or others. Best of luck to your career field, to your careers rather, and I appreciate everything you guys do. Any other questions before I sign out? All right. All right. Thank you so